Hello, and thank you very much again for coming along this evening. This evening we're going to look at, in effect, the piling up of more and more information of climate science on the one hand, and the total collapse of nation-state governments in reference to the crisis that they're facing and failing to address. This is a problem because it's not only in the United States, it is principally in the United States at this point, but other central governments are failing to act as well. And some of them are quite literally falling apart right before our very eyes because of the crises imposed on the global system by a changing climate. Specifically, climate change is provoking massive international migration at this point. And virtually every industrial country is under pressure from incoming migrants, or the perception of incoming migrants. In fact, they haven't been pressured by as many as are already on the move because of the displacement from climate change. But governments are not capable of addressing this issue. As we've seen, central governments around the world are collapsing on the immigration issues, especially here in the United States. So we're going to be looking for a while today in particular at this whole question of what do we do after Paris. After Paris 2015, which was the global climate agreement reached at the COP meeting, this COP21, the Conference of Parties in Paris in 2015, there was an agreement to move forward internationally. But several elections and changes of government took place since then, and referendum, as in Britain about Brexit. And they've all reversed the forward movement on climate action, restraining the emissions of carbon. So as bad climate news builds up, we're witnessing central governments shutting down. It's really quite a crisis that is dramatic, and so dramatic that the public needs to start informing themselves, since the news media is not up to the task. We're in effect coming up against some very dire warnings, but they're not coming through the news media because the news media is now entirely a subsidiary of the entertainment industry. And they feel that if they can't entertain you and sell you something in the process, they're not interested in it. Well, the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, basically gave a warning that we have only 12 years left to reverse dramatic changes in the whole of the human enterprise if we wish to survive. The IPCC report is quite scary, and you should see why.
For the last few decades, the threat of human-caused climate change has been heavily studied and reported. The scientific consensus is now clear, and we've seen a shift away from why is this happening to when will the worst happen, and finally now to how exactly will this happen. We know massive, potentially catastrophic changes are just around the corner, and the scientific community has shifted its attention from whether humans are exacerbating climate change to exactly what kinds of disasters to expect. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the recent IPCC climate report and break down what changes we can expect to see in the near future and beyond. Before we go any further, we need to establish a baseline for understanding. There will be climate change deniers in the comments. There always are. But these people are a very vocal minority. There is no longer any doubt that human activity has drastically affected the rate of climate change, and we have mountains of peer-reviewed evidence to prove it. If you're one of the people who believes climate change is a hoax, just consider who would benefit from you believing that lie. Fossil fuel advocates, special interest groups, and members of the current US and foreign governments who are heavily dependent on the fossil fuel industry for donations. They are selling your future and your children's future for a quick buck. Look at the evidence, do your research. This shouldn't be controversial. Every single person on Earth, regardless of political leaning or beliefs, would benefit from the actions recommended by the IPCC report.
Every single person on Earth would benefit, except the special interests and the fossil fuel companies that are manipulating and controlling those in political office. Well, the scientists strengthening from all quarters, and particularly the Arctic warming research, is very troubling.
Scientists have issued a new warning of Arctic warming. A report released this week finds the Arctic has been warmer over the last 5 years than at any time since 1900, the year record-keeping began. The region is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the planet.
Twice the rate of the rest of the planet, and that's the thermometer and the thermostat for the global system. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, issued their report as well. Take a look.
The world will experience more deadly fires, more flooding, and more storms if global climate change goes unchecked. This, according to a new UN report that finds 2018 will be the fourth hottest year on record.
This year is number 4, and there's an expectation that next year we could see again El Nino, which may mean that next year is likely to be warmer than this year has been.
The report by the World Meteorological Organization predicts man-made climate change will have massive socioeconomic impacts, leading to widespread population displacement and food insecurity.
We are projecting that with a 2-degree warmer world, we will have around 189 million people in a status of food insecurity, more than today. And if it is a 4 degrees warmer world, which is possible if no action is taken, we are looking beyond 1 billion more.
1 billion more people will become food insecure. Food insecure means they've got nothing to eat, right? That's a euphemism for starving. 1 billion people starving if we move towards a 4-degree change, which is quite possible if there is no drastic action to change carbon emissions. So far, there's been no drastic action, and we're facing that very imminently. Further, the CO2 emissions have gone up. And in fact, they've spiked, biggest spike in years in 2018, according to the BBC News about the US report. We don't get these reports anymore in the United States in the press, certainly in the degree to which their importance suggests that we should see them. We have to pick them up from foreign sources speaking English. For us, most of us can still speak English, and we can read the foreign news press reports about these and hear the foreign broadcasts about these issues, because it's being kept from the American public through a whole series of interconnected, one wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but interconnected interests between the large media, big business, big government, trying to keep you, in effect, from acting as a citizen and acting only as a consumer. So if they have something to sell you, they may well try to sell you something with climate as a theme. But they have no interest in you knowing about this as a citizen who might vote about your climate concerns in such a way as to change the current regime. Take a look. The oceans, in fact, are absorbing heat at a far faster rate than the land surfaces, and we're just beginning to figure out that it's measuring the oceans that are crucial. 93% of the heat coming into the system and being trapped near the Earth's surface is being trapped by the oceans. This is no mystery to any oceanographer or climate scientist, because oceans hold heat longer, and they cover over 70 to 73% of the Earth's surface. So that's where we should be looking for the changes in climate. Now, when you change the ocean temperatures, you change a lot of things, as we're beginning to discover about hurricanes. Basically, the U.S. government has started to report on this, even though the administration has denied it. Take a look.
The government issued its most dramatic report yet about climate change today, and it came with a dire warning. Scientists said the country is already feeling major effects of climate change, and it has already cost the United States hundreds of billions of dollars. The report, which was issued by 13 federal agencies, also highlights how climate change is expected to have a significant impact on the future of the economy. The report links climate change with extreme events like Hurricanes Maria and Harvey, and longer, more intense, more frequent western wildfire seasons. And scientists say there's more to come. The continental United States is already 1.8 degrees warmer than it was a century ago, and the temperature may rise by another 2.3 degrees by 2050. Unless more is done, the risks and impact of climate change are expected to shrink the U.S. economy 10% by century's end. David Easterling of NOAA, which released the report, suggested in a media call that climate change would damage the country's infrastructure, economy, and human health.
The global average temperature is much higher and is rising more rapidly than anything modern civilization has experienced. And this warming trend can only be explained by human activities.
While almost no one will escape the effects of climate change, scientists say underserved and lower-income Americans, as well as coastal communities, will feel the brunt most immediately.
Future generations can expect to experience and interact with natural systems in ways that are much different than today. Without significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, extinctions and transformative impacts on some ecosystems cannot be avoided.
The assessment is a stark contrast with the views and policies of President Trump, who often denies or dismisses the role of climate change. Today, scientists wouldn't say whether the White House pushed to have the report released on the afternoon after Thanksgiving.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of the reporting. Scientists wouldn't say if the president wanted it to be released on the day after Thanksgiving. Well, we should take a look at this report in detail. You have a chance now to get access to it through transitionstudies.net under this title, Fourth National Climate Assessment, Volume 2. And you can look at region by region of the United States in detail. This is a large 1,600-page report, and you've got access to it through the internet. It's pretty extraordinary because the reporting on it, again, began from the British. Let's listen. A British radio broadcast.
You're listening to News Out from the BBC. I'm Razia Iqbal. Now to the impact of climate change in the United States. Volume 2 of the National Climate Change Assessment has been published today, and it underlines an unmistakable message from scientists that they are more certain than ever that man-made climate change is impacting the US and it will be expensive. Some are arguing the publication of this volume has been brought forward to try to bury it a day after the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. I've been speaking to Michael E. Mann, who is a climate scientist and author. What does he make of the fact that this congressionally mandated document has been published now?
Thanks. It's good to be with you. So we know that earlier on, the Trump administration actually considered trying to actually bury the report entirely, prevent it from coming out. And I think they realized that the political repercussions of trying to do that would be even more adverse. And so what they've done clearly is to try to bury it instead by releasing it during a holiday weekend, the Thanksgiving weekend, this Friday called Black Friday in the United States. It's one of the busiest shopping days of the year. And I think their intention was to essentially obscure the report by forcing it to be released into the oblivion of this holiday weekend. I think that's actually backfired on them because the narrative of the Trump administration trying to bury this critical report is actually, in my assessment, generated even more media interest.
Okay, so tell us exactly why they might want to bury it. What's in it?
Yeah, well, so it lays out in stark terms, as you very nicely summarized, the fact that there is no longer a debate about human-caused climate change, or the fact that we are seeing the negative impacts of climate change now play out in very vivid terms. And for your viewers who live in the UK, who experienced this record heat wave this summer, throughout the Northern Hemisphere, we saw unprecedented heat and droughts and wildfires and floods and superstorms this fall.
Okay, well, this is Michael Mann being interviewed by the BBC. And the BBC is so angry, in a sense, at the fact that American government has tried to stuff this report, completely obscure it, bringing out a 1,600-page report on a Friday afternoon after Thanksgiving, when everyone regards it as their national duty to go out and buy something, right? Black Friday keeps retailers alive in America. It's thought to be the American activity to go buy something and then watch football. It's staggering. The BBC has to report on it before the American news gets hold of it. Eventually, CBS and others have their own stories.
The congressionally mandated National Climate Assessment was released on Friday. The report detailed the extreme dangers of climate change and the toll that human activity has played in speeding up the process. Joining us now from Washington is co-author of the 2018 National Assessment and Distinguished Fellow at the World Resources Institute, Andrew Lang. So Andrew, let's start with the big picture. What are really the main takeaways from this report?
The main takeaway is that climate change is already affecting every part of the United States, region by region, and just about all parts of the economy. And that as we move forward, if we don't aggressively move towards reducing the production of greenhouse gases, then we are going to see worse and worse impacts by the end of the century.
So according to the report, can you say that humans are really directly responsible for climate change?
Yes, absolutely, authoritatively. There is absolutely no doubt that humans are the ones that are causing climate change. We're seeing spikes in the production of greenhouse gases that are leading to temperature increases that we have not seen for hundreds of thousands of years at this point.
The report details some of the effects that climate change has already had on the U.S. economy. What exactly did you find?
Well, what we did is to look at, first of all, one half of it is on what's going on right now. We're seeing increase in threats to infrastructure. We're seeing things like, $200 billion bills for extreme weather events over the past several years. And as you move forward in time, the difference between a scenario where we get a handle on climate change and one where we don't is one where you can avoid hundreds of billions of dollars of impact to the U.S. economy and save tens of thousands of lives per year.
Well, that's pretty significant. Hundreds of billions of dollars and tens of millions of lives. I mean, this is staggering. And yet the U.S. media has failed to take it up, except in one or two cases, like CBS here, in a short report. After this report, there's nothing to follow it up. There's nothing that takes it further. They basically drop it out of the news cycle altogether. And every once in a while, we get the orange-haired leader talking about these things. Take a look.
President Trump said Monday he does not believe the findings of last week's government report on climate change. 13 federal agencies contributed to the report, which warns human-driven climate change threatens to shrink the U.S. economy by as much as 10% by 2100, while increasing extreme weather events, destroying infrastructure, worsening air quality, destroying crops, and leading to more frequent disease outbreaks. This is Trump speaking with reporters on Monday.
I've seen it, I've read some of it, and it's fine. Yeah, I don't believe it.
He's seen it, he's read some of it, and it's fine. But when asked about the economic impact, he says, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Okay, I mean, this is the kind of leadership that is leading to the collapse of central governments around the world. And it's happening even though, belatedly, the American media is starting to talk about it. In this case, NPR did an audio story on it.
A giant new government report says climate change is already hurting communities in the U.S. It was supposed to be published in December. The White House instead chose to publish it today, Black Friday, despite opposition from many scientists. In a few minutes, we'll hear from one of the scientists who contributed to the report. First, NPR's Rebecca Hersher explains wildfires, floods, droughts, and air pollution are all worse because of global warming, and yet scientists say there's hope.
The story of this climate change report actually starts almost 30 years ago.
This White House conference on global climate change was expected to begin about 15 minutes ago.
It's halfway through the first Bush administration.
George Bush, President of the United States.
When Bush takes the stage here, it's April, and the White House is feeling the heat, so to speak, on global warming. A United Nations panel had just published its first report ever saying that humans are causing global warming.
Now that's 30 years ago, with George Bush the first, right, who recently died. And we have a president now who's suppressing the report.
This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show with the alarming new climate change report that the White House tried to bury by releasing it on Black Friday, one of the slowest news days of the year. The 1,656-page government assessment directly contradicts President Trump's history of climate change denial, warning human-driven climate change threatens human health, will continue to lead to more extreme weather conditions, and could shrink the U.S. economy by as much as 10% by the end of the century. The findings are a sharp rebuke to the Trump administration's insistence that environmental regulations hurt jobs and hinder economic growth.
Okay, well, you get the point, and you get the pattern here. In the UN Climate Conference, it was embarrassing. The United States was trying to block efforts to control carbon emissions and promote fossil fuels. Citizens groups got up and said, keep it in the ground. The administration responds by appointing a coal lobbyist as the new head of EPA. Now, meanwhile, it's obvious to everyone in the world that millions will be displaced by global warming as emissions rise. And this is at the base of much of the caravan coming to the States. The U.S. is humiliated by a 15-year-old girl who stands up in the conference of parties and scolds Trump. But after the bad climate news builds up, central governments come to a total halt. This is true in Britain as well as here. It's the crisis of climate change. Unfortunately, there is a citizen response.